Gardner Fox started the process of bringing the Golden Age and Silver Age together in the same space in September 1961 with issue 123 of The Flash, in which the Flash, the Silver Age Flash, Barry Allen of Central City, is vibrating super fast to do a trick for some school kids, and he goes too fast, so fast that he vibrates his way right through the space-time continuum and winds up in another dimension in an alternate reality, a reality in which the city that he knows as Central City is instead called Keystone City. Having grown up idolizing the Flash in the comics, the Golden Age Flash, Barry Allen immediately realizes that the fictional to him city of Keystone City is where Jay Garrick the Flash lived. So he looks him up in the phone book and goes to his house and finds out that yes, indeed, there is a Jay Garrick and that he was formerly the Flash, but he'd retired. Well, they team up to take on some of the villains of that Earth's Flash and decide to stay in touch. And, in fact, they do. Although Jay Garrick is justifiably a little freaked out when he learns that in Barry Allen's alternate reality, that Jay Garrick is a fictional character in a comic book whose exploits were written about by some guy named Gardner Fox, who told people that the stories came to him in dreams. And they figure out that the dreams of Gardner Fox are actually sort of echoes of actual events in that alternate parallel Earth, which is vibrating at a slightly different speed. Well, a couple of years after that, the Flashes meet again. This time, Barry Allen vibrates his way to Jay Garrick's parallel Earth in order to help that Flash take on an old Justice Society enemy, Vandal Savage, the Immortal. Turns out that Vandal Savage had been getting his revenge on the Justice Society, which had broken up many, many years before, by capturing them all. And Jay Garrick was the only one that he didn't have yet. And so the two Flashes team up to defeat Vandal Savage and free the other Justice Society members, who then decide, hey, we should do this all the time, and we should come out of retirement and be the Justice Society once again. And that laid the groundwork just a couple of months later for another story. By the way, all these stories so far have been by Gardner Fox. Another story in the pages of the Justice League of America, in which a group of arch supervillains from Jay Garrick's Earth make their way to Barry Allen's Earth and are wreaking havoc and causing problems for the Justice League and the Flash. Barry Allen informs his teammates there's this whole other parallel Earth where people that they thought were just comic book characters from the 1940s actually lived. So the Justice League crosses over with the help of the Flash, and the two groups meet for the first time. It is decided at this point by the Justice Leaguers that to keep things straight, they're going to refer to their Earth as Earth-1, that's the Silver Age Justice League Earth, and that other parallel world that they sometimes go to as Earth-2, which is where the Golden Age superheroes lived. And that's kind of weird, right? Because Earth-2 is where the oldest stories about the earlier superheroes come from. But that's the way they did it, Earth-1 and Earth-2. And they discover that there are alternate versions of some of them as well, not just different people with different names having the same super identity, but that on Earth-2, there's also a Wonder Woman, and there's also a Batman, and a Superman, and a Green Arrow, and etc. Except they're about 20 years older. So, over there on the right, on top, waving his pipe around, is Bruce Wayne, the Batman of Earth-1, who never got a yellow circle around his bat, by the way. And then there on the bottom, there's Superman. You can see graying at the temples. That's the Earth-2 Superman. Now, Wonder Woman, of course, doesn't age, so she looks the same in both. Pay attention to the title of that story by Gardner Fox, Crisis on Earth-1. Pay attention to that, because that whole crisis on Earth so-and-so is going to come back later on in DC, and it's all kind of an homage to this story, this original story. Also, the Justice League and the Justice Society continue to share adventures. In fact, once a year, there's a crossover between the Justice League and the Justice Society, who eventually get their own book, once again, The Exploits of the Heroes over on Earth-2. This image here is from, probably just from the looks of it and the lineup, I'd say around 1980, with the Justice League folks on the left, Justice Society on the right, including both versions of Superman and Wonder Woman. All right, so you got Earth-1, that's actually the newer heroes, and Earth-2, that's the older heroes. Although in Earth-2, where there's older heroes, they also start introducing newer heroes. And this is where it starts to get complicated. And thus we begin the convoluted story of the Black Canary, who debuted in 1947 in an issue of Flash Comics. She was created in 1947 by Robert Conagher and Carmine Infantino. She was a backup feature in the Flash. Her real name was Dinah Drake, and she was actually brunette. But when she went undercover to try to infiltrate various gangster groups and so forth, and adopted the identity of the Black Canary, she wore a blonde wig. And of course, if you're going to infiltrate organized crime, a black leather jacket and fishnet stockings and a blonde wig, apparently the way to go. Now, in those 1940s comics, her love interest was Gotham detective Larry Lance, who in the timeline as it was established by the 1960s, once the Justice Society had been reintroduced in the pages of Justice League, had gone on, he and Dinah, to get married. Okay? So in one of the Justice League Justice Society crossovers in 1969, the Black Canary was helpless before this evil magical wizard called Aquarius, who was about to kill her, when her loving husband jumped in the way and saved her life, giving his own in the process. Well, this saved, I'm not sure, I think it saved several Earths, actually. However, after that, and I mean like immediately after that, at the end of that story, Black Canary told her Justice Society friends that she was not going back to Earth-2 with them because it held too many bad memories, sad memories of her lost husband, and instead she was moving to Earth-1. And so she did, and became a member of the Justice League instead of the Justice Society. And oddly enough, very next issue, once she gets to Earth-1, she discovers that she has superpowers. Black Canary, before this, was just, her superpower was being really badass and beating people up. But now all of a sudden she discovers that she has a sonic scream, that she can unleash these sonic waves that are extremely powerful and can knock things down and stuff. And it is speculated by Batman, the world's greatest detective, that this must be a side effect of all the magical energy that she got dosed with when her husband saved her from Aquarius. Well, in addition to discovering she has superpowers, by the end of that very next issue, she was beginning a burgeoning relationship with Oliver Queen, the Green Arrow. And indeed, they would find health again and find love again with one another. They became an item. There they are on the left from that very 1969 issue. And they would remain an item ever after, although, with DC continuity getting reset and retconned, retroactive continuity cutting in, the story kind of shifts and changes back and forth. But generally speaking, over time, they have remained a DC couple. But there was a problem by the 1980s. So the idea is that Black Canary, alias Dinah Drake, then alias Dinah Lance, because she married Larry Lance, was, in fact, the same Black Canary from the 1940s, just like the other Justice Society people. So she debuted in 1947. So by 1969, she's got to be around 40 years old. And for all we know, Oliver Queen also around the same age, because he had that ongoing continuity, late 30s, early 40s, and that worked in 1969. But flash forward, say 15 years, and Oliver Queen is clearly not being presented in the comics as a 60-year-old, and neither is Dinah, the Black Canary, but according to the continuity, she would be. Right? And how do you explain that? Well, the best thing to do is always to have a simple explanation. So the simple explanation that writers came up with in 1983 was that during actually it was the 20th anniversary crossover between the Justice League and the Justice Society, Black Canary learns the truth about her identity. So it turns out, and Earth-2 Superman is telling her this story of what had happened back in that 1969 issue, although it's not been 14 years in comic book time. He explains that she and Larry Lance had a child, which she doesn't remember, had a child that they also named Dinah. And that child had these sonic powers from birth, and every time it would cry, it would threaten to destroy the city. So Johnny Thunder's genie friend had taken the baby and put her in suspended animation, and so she continued to grow. She was like Sleeping Beauty, which means she never developed any kind of personality or anything. She was just like, a blank slate infant, and she was hanging out here in suspended animation in this other dimension. And back during that battle with Aquarius, when Larry Lance was killed, turns out that Dinah Lance, his wife, also got a fatal dose of magic, whatever it was, that was killing her as well. And so Superman from Earth-2 bowed to her wishes to go see her child one last time, and Superman, Earth-2, and Johnny Thunder's genie and the Black Canary come up with this idea of transferring her mind to the young body of her own daughter, who's basically been a vegetable for however long, 20 years or whatever. And so when the transfer is complete and the mother dies, the daughter now has the mother's mind, thinks she is the mother, and they don't tell her any different. And in fact, Superman, Earth-2, and the genie don't tell anybody. So all that stuff then theoretically happened, right, from the Justice League story, where Black Canary says, I have too many sad memories of my dead husband, I'm going to come live on Earth-1, and so she did, and that was actually the daughter, but the daughter didn't realize that she was her own mother, or maybe that she was her own daughter. Anyway, whatever. Oliver Queen didn't know any of this stuff. And so that's a simple explanation, right? Obviously, not really. Spoiler alert, 1986, there's going to be a big crossover event called Crisis on Infinite Earths at DC. That is probably the biggest and most important crossover event ever in comic books. And we'll talk a lot about that later, so I won't tell you any details, other than to tell you that one of the side effects is that reality gets switched around. And so from 1986 forward, the story is, the Golden Age Black Canary was the mother, and all the adventures of the Silver Age Black Canary are her daughter, but it's not her mother's mind in her daughter's body. It's the mother who's still alive but older, and then the daughter, and they both know this. And so all that gets changed around. So there. See, that's not confusing at all. It is, however, a good indication of just how confusing and convoluted things can get when DC decides in the 60s to explain away the adventures of the superheroes in the 40s by saying it was an alternate reality. But then what happens when those characters from the 60s start to age as well, right? Because comics companies don't want their superheroes to become geriatric. Now, I left this slide up here just so that you can refer to it to try to kind of keep these things straight. And then I'll close by looking at live action, because up in the upper right-hand corner you can see that is the Black Canary on the big screen in the Harley Quinn Birds of Prey movie from 2020. And that Black Canary is a canary and is black in the sense of being African American. Meanwhile, on television, you've got also a Dinah Lance, whose dad was in fact a detective, who is the Black Canary on the Arrow, and the Arrow is Green Arrow, the Arrow television show. Except that, of course, instead of a mother and a daughter being both Black Canary at different times on the TV show, you've got actually older sister, younger sister, one of whom is Black Canary and one of whom is just Canary. And I'm not even going to try to explain that right now. Here's another Earth-2 female superhero who would be very interesting but eventually cause some problems in continuity. And that is the Huntress, who was not a Golden Age character, although there was a Golden Age villain, minor villain called the Huntress. But in the DC's Earth-2 continuity, she's not like one of the old comic book characters. She was created new in 1977 to be in the Justice Society stories and on Earth-2. And she is the daughter of Batman and Catwoman, who apparently got married on Earth-2. The Catwoman, Selina Kyle, went straight. Batman married her, Bruce Wayne, that is, Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, and this was their daughter. So she was trained by both parents, Batman and Catwoman, and had a wide variety of skills. Eventually, actually not eventually, in pretty short order, became a new member of the Justice Society of America. Why is that going to be a problem? Well, you'll have to wait and see on that. Okay, so Earth 1, Earth 2. Two different Earths, two different time periods coming together now in the same time period. You can see where over time, as I've hinted, that would get more complicated. So let's take a look at some of those compounding complications. Okay, so we've got Earth 1. That's the comic book DC universe that was at the time, going on at the time, the Silver Age, and then following that into the other various ages. So that's Earth 1. And then you have Earth 2, which is mostly the heroes from the Golden Age, the 1940s, in an alternate reality, a parallel Earth. Okay, Earth-1, Earth-2. Well, it is discovered that there's also Earth-Prime. On Earth-Prime, there are no superheroes, and the various superheroes of Earth-1 are known as fictional characters in comic books, and the Flash is the first person to discover this when he accidentally, with his crazy vibrating, accidentally goes to Earth-Prime, which is where, well, actually, according to the DC timeline, we are on Earth-Prime, and the various DC superheroes are comic books. So when the Flash gets there, he realizes this and contacts the people that make the comic books, and he goes to the DC headquarters building there and walks right in to see Julius Schwartz. And eventually it is figured out that, much like Barry Allen, Earth-1 Flash on his Earth, read comic books about Earth-2 Flash Jay Garrick, because those adventures that really did happen on Earth-2 came through in emanations to Gardner Fox. Same thing is happening with Earth-2 heroes' adventures onto the Earth-Prime creators in their dreams. And so you've got Julius Schwartz as a character showing up. You've also got Cary Bates. He's the guy in the beard on the right, who is winds up actually getting superpowers in one story and becoming a crazed supervillain. So anyway, Earth-Prime, no heroes. Okay, Earth-1, Earth-2, Earth-Prime. Earth-3, which is a parallel Earth on which the core members of the Justice League, and actually I guess these would also be the core members of the Justice Society, exist as meanies, as villains, known not as the Justice League or Justice Society or any of that silly stuff, but as the Crime Syndicate, led by, well, depending on which one of them you ask, Ultraman, Superwoman, or Owlman, and including Power Ring and Johnny Quick. And then there's Earth-4, which is the Earth in which the Charlton superheroes live, that, as you will recall, in the late 50s got bought by DC. So they bought them, but they're not sure what to do with them. They can't just bring them into the regular continuity and just have them show up one day. So their subsequent adventures, and by extension all their past adventures, happen on their own parallel Earth, Earth-4. Okay, perhaps you're seeing a pattern. There's a lot of parallel Earths that show up in DC Comics throughout the 1960s and beyond. And I'm not going to go through every single one of them because most of them just appeared one time. I'm just looking at the ones that appeared more than once. Okay, there's also the place that was called by its creator, Jack Kirby, the Fourth World, that subsequently was referred to by other characters in the DC universe as Earth-14. That is the place where Jack Kirby's early 1970s DC stuff was set. The New Gods and the Mr. Miracle and others. The Forever People and so on. Speaking of Jack Kirby, while he was at DC, he went ahead and created another parallel Earth to set things in that would come to be known as Earth-86. And that's because in this timeline, which was comic books made in the mid-70s, Earth was beset by limited nuclear war in 1986. So Earth-86. Also, Earth pretty much got 86'd So it's a dystopian future that was the setting for Jack Kirby's OMAC, the One-Man Army Corps, and was also the setting for his Commandee, the Last Boy on Earth. Spoiler alert, it's eventually revealed that OMAC was the grandfather of Commandee, which is set farther in the future. And then there's also Hercules Unbound, not by Jack Kirby, but they set it in the same universe as these two Jack Kirby titles, just to kind of expand that a little bit. So this is Hercules, the Greek demigod, who shows up in this post-apocalyptic future. Like I said, not written or drawn by Jack Kirby, but Bill Everett he did the pencils on some of the issues, and Wally Wood did the inks on most of them, maybe all of them. All right. Well, Earth 86. Surely that's enough. Of course not. There's also Earth-2, or Earth Quality, or the Quality Universe. Much like Earth-4, which is where the Charlton heroes are, this is where the Quality Comics heroes' adventures take place, such as Plastic Man, the Spirit, and the virtual clone of the Spirit named Midnight, also the Clock, who looks just like the Spirit in Midnight, and also the Black Hawk Squadron. So, Earth-2. DC bought the Quality Comics characters also, but they didn't fold them in to the regular continuity with their own DC characters. All right. Well, what else could we come up with? Oh, here's one we've already mentioned before. Earth-X, sometimes called Earth-10, which is where several of actually the Quality characters went to this other parallel Earth. So these guys are all from Earth-Q, but they went to Earth-X, and at Earth-X, the Nazis won World War II, and these superheroes go over there to lead a resistance that lasts well into the 1970s. So the freedom fighters are on Earth-X. Well, we got lots of numbers, we got lots of letters. Let's throw another one in there. Earth-S for Earth Shazam, for the Fawcett Publications superheroes, most of whom were Marvels of one kind or another. Captain Marvel, Billy Marvel, Captain Marvel Jr., Mary Marvel, Uncle Marv Marvel, all the Marvels are on Earth-S. Again, because DC bought them out and now owns their characters. There's also one referred to as Earth Crossover, and I think I may have made a brief mention of this a little bit earlier. This is the setting, Earth Crossover, for those specials that came out in the 70s, late 70s and early 80s, where Marvel and DC characters met each other. But it wasn't like, hey, I'm from one universe, you're from a parallel universe, this is amazing. It's more like they're both from the same place, and for some odd reason, no one ever mentions Metropolis or Gotham in the Marvel hero stories. Anyway, you had Superman meeting Spider-Man twice, Batman meeting the Hulk, and the X-Men meeting the Teen Titans. So, all this stuff, Earth-S, Earth-X, Earth 1, 2, 3, 4, Earth Crossover, Earth Quality. There was even Earth-C, because in the early 80s, I think it was 1981 or so, could have been 82, DC decided to try out a funny animal comic geared toward kids, which they used to do, right? But they had canceled all those, and they hadn't had one in 10 years. So they bring out a bunch of funny animal superheroes called Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew, written by Roy Thomas. And in their very first issue, they meet Superman, who's from an alternate reality, which means that they are part of the DC multiverse, Earth-C, the cartoon universe. Well, as you can see, that's hard to keep track of. That's why I've got this handy list for you to refer back to if you wish, although by no means will you be expected to remember all this. What you do need to remember is that it was really messed up and complicated and complex. And by 1985, 86, it had gotten so complicated it was impossible to keep straight. And that was after 22 years, 22 and a half years since the Justice League and Justice Society met each other. So about a quarter of a century after that flash of two worlds. And by that point, something has got to be done to try to simplify all this stuff. And something very, very big is. But I'll have to leave you in suspense, unless you already know the story, until much later on when we get to the 1980s in our narrative.